This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
pass the Freedom to Vote Act.
President Biden tells senators to do whatever it takes to get voting rights passed.
Making sure that our budget is balanced.
Tennessee lawmakers begin debate on bills dealing with education, COVID, and more. As the new legislative session begins, more in our This Week cover story.
The numbers of cases that we're seeing reported are probably an underestimate of the true COVID cases circulating in the community.
Omicron continues to surge in Tennessee, and hospitals are again being overwhelmed with patients and sick staff.
Nashville, like other cities, is experiencing a COVID surge.
Nashville's coronavirus task force makes plans for dealing with the Omicron surge while keeping schools and businesses open.
Honestly, there's really nothing we can do about it. It's the way that the law is set up in Tennessee. Who has the powers, that's who make the rules.
Tennessee Democrats called the Republican-controlled legislature's redistricting plan an effort to rig future elections in favor of the GOP. Hello again and welcome to another edition of This Week. Tennessee lawmakers return to the state capitol to begin the 112th legislative session dealing with elections, COVID, education funding, and other issues. The president, meanwhile, pushes for voting rights, and cases of COVID-19 surge as we look at the other political headlines of the week. The 2022 midterm elections are less than 10 months away. President Biden is making his biggest push yet to advocate for passage of a new federal voting rights bill. Speaking in Georgia, where critics say some voting rights have been curtailed, the president called for changes to the Senate's filibuster rule so voting rights legislation can be passed with a simple majority. Current rules require 60 votes to advance most legislation.
President Biden in Atlanta making the case to Congress and the country to alter the filibuster in order to pass voting rights legislation.
Pass the Freedom to Vote Act. Pass it now.
The president saying he supports changing the Senate rules in whatever way. He also used part of his speech to attack the former president for previous attempts to subvert the vote, as well as Senate Republicans who refused to break apart from the party in order to protect voting rights.
Not a single Republican has displayed the courage to stand up to a defeated president to protect America's right to vote.
The Freedom to Vote Act was co-written and supported by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. In part, it would make Election Day a federal holiday, guarantee the right to mail-in vote, and require Justice Department approval to change state voting laws. It's currently being blocked by Senate Republicans.
The Senate Democratic leader is trying to bully his own members into breaking their word, breaking the Senate.
But the nonpartisan Brennan Center for Justice says 19 states, including Georgia, have passed a total of 34 new restrictive voting laws since the 2020 election, many of which are fueled by lies, claiming widespread election fraud. And despite election security officials saying the 2020 elections were the most secure in the country's history. South Carolina Representative Jim Clyburn says it's time for Democrats to go at it alone.
They are filibustering the bill Joe Manchin has put up, and if Joe Manchin is going to support this filibuster, then he must not be serious about his own legislation.
Still, Senator Manchin's position on the filibuster not appearing to change.
We need some good rule changes to make the place work better, but getting rid of the filibuster doesn't make it work better.
And the Brennan Center says 13 more restrictive laws are in the works, including one in Georgia that would ban the use of ballot boxes altogether. Ike Ajachi, ABC News, Washington.
Alarming but not unexpected. That's how doctors are describing the latest COVID-19 surge in Tennessee, led by the Omicron variant. News 2's Gerald Harris reports on growing concerns over hospital capacity as COVID cases skyrocket yet again in Tennessee.
The situation in Tennessee is alarming, but not unexpected. We're seeing trends here comparable to what we're seeing really all over the country.
The Tennessee Department of Health decided to end its daily COVID-19 case reporting, but according to data from the CDC, over the weekend, Tennessee surpassed its peak in cases with over 19,500, and it's likely to do so again.
The Omicron case numbers are really skyrocketing And that seems to be moving kind of to the South and Midwest a little more.
Data shows about 1 in 350 Tennesseans testing positive for COVID-19, but the true number is likely higher.
There's a lot of COVID out there. And, we have to remember that the numbers of cases that we're seeing reported are probably an underestimate of the true COVID cases circulating in the community. A lot of people are testing at home using rapid tests, and those are not always reported to the state.
Just 51% of the state is fully vaccinated, with concerns that Tennessee hospitals could become overwhelmed.
We are going to see a higher number of hospitalizations in our community just by the sheer fact that we're seeing so many cases, and 30, 40, 50% may not be vaccinated. And those are the people that are really high risk for severe disease with Omicron.
Nationally, hospitalizations due to COVID are reaching all-time highs. Many hospitals are dealing with a worker shortage because their own staff have COVID as well. In Nashville, 1 out of every 33 residents is battling the virus. ABC's Morgan Norwood explains how and when more tests will arrive for millions of Americans.
With more than 141,000 patients filling hospitals across America, the country is now reaching a new pandemic record.
It really is just like a second surge right on top of the last one.
In New Jersey, half of new hospital admissions are people needing treatment for COVID. The number of patients in the ICU and needing ventilators doubling since Christmas to levels not seen since May 2020. But it's not just the influx of patients pushing hospitals beyond their limits. It's the staffing shortages. Many healthcare workers are out sick with COVID, leaving already strained hospitals stretched thin. California is changing its rules to allow asymptomatic healthcare workers who test positive to return to work without isolating or testing negative, triggering pushback from the nurses union.
We're in this industry to care for others. That's the root word right there. And yet we are asking to put others at potential harm.
Just outside of Dallas, one school system is scrambling to find substitute teachers.
We had the counselor go in, we had the librarian go in, we'll have the principal, assistant principal. We've had people from our central office come and sit in a classroom.
And in Chicago, classes canceled for a 4th day amid a standoff between the city and teachers union over remote learning.
I am pleading with CPS and CTU to do all they can to find an immediate and safe path for the benefit of our children's education and mental health well-being.
And the demand for testing is intensifying. The White House says the millions of free COVID tests it promised will be out the door in the coming weeks.
Americans will begin being able to order these tests online later this month.
Morgan Norwood, ABC News, Los Angeles.
Now to our This Week cover story. Lawmakers are back at the state capitol for the 112th General Assembly. Under consideration are issues ranging from education funding to crime and redistricting. News 2's Gerald Harris has more on the start of the session.
The goals of lawmakers typically range at the start of a new session.
Making sure that our budget is balanced and making sure that excess revenue is not just frittered away.
But this year could see historic impacts if certain bills are passed, beginning with education and Governor Bill Lee's plan to revisit how public schools are funded. Tennessee's Lieutenant Governor, who leads the Senate, is supportive of allowing schools that achieve at a higher rate to reap the benefits of funding.
I certainly would be open to looking at that, to basing some of the funding on performance.
Democrats are open to changing the current basic education formula, but awaits a proposal from the Republican supermajority.
So it would be interesting to see what the new philosophy would be under this administration. I'm open to hearing and seeing what that is, but it's not, from what I understand, it's not to rewrite BEP. It's just to come up with an alternative way of funding education.
Redistricting will also be a key issue, not only on the state level, but congressionally too. Current plans slice up Davidson County, a Democratic stronghold, as many as 2 or 3 ways.
I don't think it's an effort to eliminate a Democrat. It's just that the districts on the east had to move west and the ones on the west had to move east.
Democrats say they're not falling for it, calling it an attempt to gerrymander districts.
It's baffling to me, the philosophy that's being used in this redistricting process, because I think the citizens expect more. The citizens expect to be heard in this process, expect the that their wishes, wants, and desires would be incorporated into whatever the strategy is.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. I am pleased to be joined by Nashville Democratic State Representative Vincent Dixie, also the chair of the Democratic Caucus. Welcome, sir. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for having me.
I know the legislature has just begun. It's going to be a busy session, probably short because it's an election year. Let's start with the redistricting. I know you're not happy with it. It's dividing up Davidson County. 9 of your fellow Democrats are going to have to fight each other for a seat. Unhappy with it, but is there anything you can do about it?
Honestly, there's really nothing we can do about it. It's the way that the law is set up in Tennessee. Who has the powers? That's who make the rules, and it's the ultimate golden rule here. So we would hope that common sense and common decency would surpass pettiness and indifference when it comes to doing this a bipartisan product, and when it comes to redistricting, because this is going to shape our state for years to come. And we would hope that it would have been a true bipartisan process, because this was nothing of the sort. It was very covert. It was not transparent, and I would have hoped that it would have had a better process. And I went in really optimistic that it would be, but at the end of the day, they showed us who we thought they were.
Ohio just filed a lawsuit. They won that lawsuit, and their redistricting plan was thrown out. They had to redraw it. Any possibility of a lawsuit here?
Most definitely. It was always the plan for a lawsuit, because we know that they don't play fair. It's not been a fair fight, because they know if it's a fair fight, they will probably lose. So they have to rig the system in their favor in order to try to get things done. Their policies are failing people here in Tennessee. People are dying. Families are hurting. So the outcome in Ohio gives us a great opportunity and gives us hope as we move to court. And it sets a precedent that this is really basically racial gerrymandering at its best. It is not based on political maps at all. It's just based on true race and how to subvert and depress the African-American vote here in Tennessee.
One of the big issues this year, Governor Lee wants to change how the schools are funded. He wants to reward overachieving or highly achieving schools, which is a good idea. But if there's not additional funding, will that not mean that money from underachieving schools is going to be taken away?
I think that first, I do applaud them for taking on the BEP formula. That's been broken for a long time. It was never meant to be a long-term fix. So I do applaud him for doing that. But at the end of the day, if you're underfunding schools, how do you expect them to overperform? So we have to find out, if you're truly going to base this formula on student need and student base, those underachieving schools that has the greatest need should get the most money. I've talked to a lot of teachers across the state, and a lot of times they say they don't feel supported. And we have to give them the support that they need, because they spend a lot of time outside of the classroom. They spend a lot of their own money. And any teacher that do this, they don't do it for the money. They do it because they want to see students to succeed and give them a great educational experience. So I would hope that we could work together, because when it comes to the big issues here in Tennessee, it's been very partisan. It's not really been a bipartisan effort. And I think the only way to get to a true solution when it comes to these big problems is to get all the stakeholders at the side. You don't need everybody who's going to agree with you and not tell you the truth on how to solve these problems. So we have some work to do here. And I would hope that the governor would be open to listening and not try to use this as a precursor to get vouchers in Tennessee.
As you're well aware, Tennessee is leading the nation per capita in COVID cases. We have been underperforming as far as vaccination goes. Less than half of the state is vaccinated.
When the governor and the Speaker of the House call leading, it has gotten us where we are today when it comes to this COVID. We were in a special session a year ago, and we addressed COVID issues. Right now, we're at a point that we're at a crisis in our school system, because kids are calling out of school at a high rate and they can't go to attend school, but they have no relief in order to go to a virtual environment, because we made it illegal in the General Assembly. So that's what I'm saying. We don't have the leadership and the foresight to see for these problems. When we were here a year ago in a special session, I said we have a perfect opportunity to set the procedures and a protocol to how to get our children back into the classrooms safely, because we all agree that in-person learning is the best. But because we didn't take the time to get it right back then, that's why we are right here right now. Most of the cases that we have, they're spreading to the younger people right now, and that's what's spreading like wildfires. And the governor is not leading there. And also what I have to add in with the Speaker of the House is they have not led on this issue. They have let a few people on the far right dominate the conversation for the best interests of Tennesseans. And I think that's just woefully wrong. And we've got it wrong. So who's in charge matters and leadership matters. But do your job right here, right now, and make sure that our job right now, when we were elected, is how do we make Tennessee best for all Tennesseans, not just for Republicans, not just for Democrats, but for all Tennesseans.
Hey, Representative Vincent Dixie, appreciate your time and your insight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob. It's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you.
Stay with us. This week continues in a moment. Welcome back. Nashville, like the rest of the country, dealing with COVID. Here's what they had to say this week about it.
Nashville, like other cities, is experiencing a COVID surge.
This is the largest spike in COVID cases since the pandemic began.
Cases here are rising quickly, and we know the Omicron variant spreads easily, even more easily than previous variants. But what's different today, and the reason for today's call, is the booster. If you are fully vaccinated and have received a booster and you then contract COVID, you will very likely experience illness that is much less severe. The vaccine and the all-important booster gives us a way to manage this surge and move forward with our lives.
The big problem with Omicron is how quickly it spreads.
Now, the number of active cases we currently have in our county is 22,776 people. 1 out of every 33 Nashvillians currently is actively infected with COVID-19. Just last week, this number was a little less than 16,000. And to put this in perspective, when we were at our worst days with the Delta variant, we had 8,500, and we're now nearly 3 times that number. Total number of cases in Nashville from the beginning of this pandemic sit at 167,346. And unfortunately, 1,368 Nashvillians have died from the beginning of this pandemic.
Vaccinations are important to preventing serious illness and death, and the key is the booster.
Now in Nashville, 62.9% of Nashvillians are fully vaccinated. That's 0.5% higher than the national rate. It's also more than 11% higher than the state's vaccination rate. But just fewer than 168,000 residents have received the booster. And now that number needs to go way up in the coming weeks. Nashville, today is your day to get your booster shot.
And while 436,491 Nashvillians are fully vaccinated, and not all of them currently qualify for a booster, only 39% of the fully vaccinated have received a booster dose. So to reiterate the mayor's message, it is so important that if you qualify for a booster, to please get one.
Hospitalizations are also on the rise.
We also continue to see our hospitalization rates go higher than it has in the recent past. Today, there are 707 patients in Nashville area hospitals with COVID-19. About 23% of these individuals, or 165, are in the ICU. About 90 days ago, the most we saw for a single day was 457, of which 36%, or 163 people, were in the ICU. So the percentage of people in the ICU currently is less than we've seen historically. But the thing to remember is this. Even though this variant may cause a smaller percentage of infected people to be hospitalized because of the virus, there are a lot more actively infected people than ever before. And thus, a smaller percentage of a really large number is still a lot of people filling up our hospitals. Also, let's not lose sight of those admitted and seriously ill from COVID. These people, by several multiples, are mainly unvaccinated. Vaccines save lives. So go get your vaccine and your booster if indicated. And remember, as we have for nearly 2 years, we must continue to approach this with a sense of community. So please do what is needed to take care of each other now.
Now, none of us want to be talking about COVID still, but we have the tools we need to manage Omicron. The booster, the vaccine, and testing when needed, and masks. So remember to get your booster shot and to wear your mask when appropriate in public.
Testing has become more easily available.
The volume of our sites have increased greatly following the holidays and the spread of Omicron variant of COVID-19. On average, our sites test around 1,600 people a day. We also average about 90 vaccines a day. We are working diligently with Meharry Medical and Metro Public Health to make sure there is access to testing and vaccinations.
Now, we're committed to making it as easy as possible to get your vaccine and booster and a test if you need one. And I want to thank the entire Metro team for increasing their efforts to match the current needs, despite staffing constraints. Now, we've increased the number of testing lanes and we've expanded to Saturday testing, and Metro Public Health has increased its community vaccination and testing events.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. I want to thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. I want to thank my guest, Democratic State Representative and Caucus Chair Vincent Dixie. Hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week, and you have a great week.